Tonight, we follow a fleet that vanished into history, a group of knights betrayed by crown and cross, yet somehow slipping through the net of time and memory. A story of ships that sailed under moonless skies, carrying more than men, secrets, treasures, perhaps even the legacy of a forgotten order. In October of 1307, the streets of France ran with betrayal. The Knights Templar were arrested, their power dismantled, their names condemned. But not all fell into the hands of kings and popes. Some escaped, slipping into hidden harbours, sailing toward destinations only whispered about in legend. This isn't just a tale of missing ships or scattered men. It's about a plan, a mission, and a knowledge that refused to die. For centuries, their presence has been erased from chronicles, yet traces linger in hidden ports, coded symbols, architecture, and myths that stretch from Europe to the New World. The fleet may have disappeared from sight, but the legacy endured. And tonight, we trace it, from La Rochelle to Roslin, from Portugal to Nova Scotia, following the path of those who learn to hide in plain sight. So before you dismiss this as myth or fantasy, ask yourself, what if the story of the Templars is far more than history? What if it's a secret waiting for the right eyes to see? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we chase the fleet that vanished and uncover the shadows they left behind. The streets of Paris were quiet just before dawn, but something was wrong in the silence, not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that comes before steel is drawn. On the 13th of October in the year 1307, the ground began to tremble under the weight of marching boots. Armour clanged, horses snorted in the mist, and the world changed forever. In a single morning, one of the most powerful and mysterious organizations in Europe was destroyed, or so it seemed. The Knights Templar, once praised as holy warriors and protectors of pilgrims, were now branded as heretics and traitors. Hundreds were seized that morning, dragged from their beds, shackled in chains, and forced into the cold. The King of France, Philip the Fair, had orchestrated the betrayal with exact timing. Monks with swords were no match for kings with debts, and Philip owed the Templars everything: gold, land, secrets. The Church followed his lead. Pope Clement, under pressure and fear, turned his back on the order he once blessed. The Templars were abandoned by both crown and cross. But as the trap slammed shut in the cities, something else was moving in the dark. In the port city of La Rochelle, sails caught the wind. Figures in white cloaks, marked with fading red crosses, moved quickly through foggy docks. Chests were loaded, scrolls sealed, horses left behind. The sea was waiting. While France hunted Templars on land, the ocean became their escape, and when the sun finally rose over the harbour, the fleet was gone. No one knows exactly how many ships slipped into the mist. Some say 12, others say more than 20. Witnesses claimed they saw strange vessels headed west into deeper waters. No flags, no lights, just silence. And then nothing. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors spoke out. The records are empty where they should be full. It was as if the fleet had vanished into thin air. Or had they? Historians try to explain it away. Storms, pirates, panic. But none of that fits. The Templars were expert sailors. They built their own ships, charted their own routes. They had ports, maps, and people in place long before the king struck. What happened that morning wasn't an accident. It was a plan, a final act, a last breath held just beneath the surface of history. In one night, the Templars became ghosts, and like all great ghosts, they left behind whispers. Whispers of treasure, of relics, of a truth so dangerous it had to be hidden at sea. Some say they carried the Holy Grail. Others say they carried names, bloodlines, secrets buried deep enough to survive fire, trial, and time. What really sailed from La Rochelle that night? A treasure fleet? A sacred mission? Or a living memory disguised as disappearance? The truth didn't sink. It sailed. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the waves carrying it forward. La Rochelle did not sleep like other cities. It breathed through its stones and murmured through its tide. By the early 1300s, it was no ordinary port. It was a fortress built on water, guarded not just by walls but by secrecy. This was the Templars' final harbour, and it was far more than it seemed. To anyone walking its narrow docks, it looked like a busy trade port, filled with salt, fish, and wool. But beneath the surface, hidden in shadows and sealed chambers, a different world stirred. The Templars had chosen La Rochelle for a reason. Its harbour ran deep enough to hide entire fleets. Its alleys twisted like a labyrinth, and its people had learned to ask no questions. Over decades, the Knights had turned the port into something quiet and invincible. Underground storage vaults connected to tunnels. Those tunnels led not just to storehouses, but to the sea. Some were wide enough for horses, others only for footsteps and whispers. Above ground, towers kept watch not just for storms, but for betrayal. When the arrests came, in October of the year 1307, the king's soldiers didn't storm La Rochelle first. They aimed for the heart of the order, in Paris. They thought they had time, but by the time their boots reached the coast, the tide had already taken the truth away. The Templars had vanished from La Rochelle as if they had rehearsed it 100 times. Because they had. This was not a panicked escape. It was the final page of a secret playbook, one known only to a handful of commanders and mariners. The fleet had been prepared, supplies moved in silence, crews gathered under the cover of prayer, and the harbour itself obeyed the plan. Local fishermen reported seeing sails slip out after midnight. No bells, no lanterns, just quiet, controlled motion. One by one, the ships disappeared into the sea mist. No one tried to stop them. No one dared. Some believed the port hid more than ships, that somewhere beneath La Rochelle lies a vault that was never emptied, a last reserve of scrolls, relics, or names. If the ships carried the body, maybe the port still holds the soul. Excavations in later centuries uncovered sealed rooms beneath old Templar holdings, stone steps that led nowhere, bricked-up archways behind altar stones. Some of these were dismissed as storage. Others were quietly refilled with earth. To this day, there are legends of a sealed chamber beneath the old commandery walls. Locals call it the Black Cellar. No one knows what it held. Some say it was a war room. Others say it was a chapel lit only by oil lamps and fear. Whatever it was never found when the king's men arrived. La Rochelle was not just the last harbour, it was the stage. The Templars didn't flee from it. They disappeared through it. And what passed through those waters on that silent night was not just a fleet. It was a message carried by tide and fog that said, we were ready, we knew, we are gone, but not lost. The fleet left La Rochelle under a moon that looked more like a secret than a light. The waves were calm that night, too calm, as if the sea itself had been sworn to silence. Witnesses spoke of white sails gliding into the mist, vanishing one after another, until nothing remained but the sound of water against stone. Dozens of ships were said to have departed, but by morning they were gone. No sails on the horizon, no wrecks washed ashore, no messages ever returned. The Templar fleet had disappeared, leaving behind the question that still haunts history. Where did they go? Chroniclers of the time wrote about the arrests, the trials, and the fires. But when it came to the ships, their ink ran dry. Some claimed storms had swallowed them. Others said pirates had struck in the night. But no storms were recorded, no battles reported. The seas gave no signs of struggle. The silence was unnatural. And for a group as organized and well-connected as the Templars, silence was rarely accidental. It is possible the fleet did not vanish at all. It deployed. Think about it. The Templars had ports across Europe, Scotland, Portugal, Cyprus, and beyond. They traded across the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. They had coded routes and trusted captains. If they had time to prepare, even a little, they could have scattered across known and unknown waters. Some ships may have headed north, others west, some perhaps south towards safer shores. If the order's end was planned, the escape may have been too. There are scattered reports from coastal towns in the years that followed. Fishermen in Brittany claimed to have seen strange ships with red crosses painted over in black. Sailors in Ireland told of vessels that refused to dock, waiting offshore as if for a signal that never came. And far away, in the Orkney Islands, locals spoke of armoured men arriving with gold and relics, seeking land and silence. None of these tales were confirmed, but they shared the same detail. The visitors never stayed long. The most haunting theory suggests the fleet never sought refuge, it sought rebirth. The ships, carrying not just gold but knowledge, may have been part of something larger, a mission to preserve what the Church wanted destroyed. Some say they carried sacred texts, others say the Grail, but perhaps the real treasure was memory itself. The Templars knew that ideas could survive longer than empires if scattered like seeds across the world. No wrecks, no graves, no names. The sea keeps its promises well. Every wave that laps against La Rochelle still carries their echo. The fleet didn't simply disappear, it transformed into a legend that refuses to die. Maybe they reached Scotland, maybe Portugal, maybe the New World itself centuries too soon, or maybe they were never meant to be found at all, because sometimes survival means becoming invisible. And that night, in 1307, the Templars mastered invisibility forever. The Templars understood something most kingdoms never did. Land could be conquered, walls could be broken, gold could be stolen, but the sea belonged to no one. It was a sanctuary, a vast, shifting cathedral where power could hide in plain sight. Long before their downfall in 1307, the Knights Templar had already mastered the waves. They were not only warriors of the cross, but architects of commerce and navigation. They built ships that could outlast storms and outmaneuver pirates. Their fleet wasn't made for conquest alone. It was made for survival, a vault that floated, carrying both treasure and truth. Their maritime knowledge was centuries ahead of its time. In an age when most European fleets hugged the coastline, the Templars sailed far beyond it. Their ships were designed for endurance, broad hulls for cargo, reinforced decks for defence, and below deck, secret compartments lined with iron and wax, perfect for storing gold, scrolls, or relics. Every port they built from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic was connected by coded routes, written not in ink but in geometry and starlight. They read the sky like scripture and mapped the world with the precision of priests. They also understood the economy of the sea. Their ships didn't just carry soldiers, they carried letters of credit, goods, spices, silver, and messages between kings and crusaders. They built one of the first global banking systems, and their fleet was its bloodstream. The sea became both their fortress and their ledger. To them, the ocean wasn't an obstacle, it was an ally, and when the world turned against them, it became their last refuge. When Philip's orders for arrest reached the coast, the Templars who controlled La Rochelle already knew what to do. They had built their entire structure to move quickly, silently, invisibly, to vanish if necessary. The ships that left that night didn't flee into chaos. They followed a plan carved into memory and sea charts. Some routes led toward the British Isles, others perhaps to the western horizon, toward lands whispered of by sailors and dreamers. They were not running, they were relocating, preserving. For the Templars, the sea was more than escape, it was sacred. Water had always carried divine meaning. It cleansed, it baptized, it connected continents and souls. To sail upon it was to trust in creation itself. Many of their prayers referenced the ocean. Their symbols, like the 8-pointed cross, mirrored the compass rose. Even their ships bore names of faith, invoking saints and angels, not for war, but for guidance. The sea kept its secrets well. In its endless movement, truth could be hidden forever or revealed at the perfect time. The Templars knew this. They had watched empires rise and crumble like sandcastles, but the tides never betrayed them. When their enemies came with torches and chains, the knights turned to the one element no king could command. The sea became their sanctuary, their silent cathedral, their final vow, and in its depths, their legacy still drifts, waiting for the world to remember. Maps are memory, drawn in ink and salt, and the Templars were masters of remembering. While kingdoms fought for land, the knights charted the sea. Their maps were not the crude outlines of coastlines common in the Middle Ages. They were layered with secrets, built on the wisdom of ancient navigators and refined through crusader voyages. These charts were their invisible empire, a network of routes that connected Jerusalem to La Rochelle, Acre to Cyprus, and perhaps even Europe to lands far beyond its known edge. Some of these maps were said to be copied from scrolls found during the Crusades. The Templars, after all, spent nearly 2 centuries in the Holy Land, where they had access to libraries older than Christianity itself. They studied texts from Alexandria, learned from Arab astronomers, and guarded relics that blended mathematics and mysticism. It was whispered that they inherited the lost knowledge of the Phoenicians, the first true masters of the sea, whose trade routes stretched into the Atlantic long before Rome rose to power. If that were true, then the Templars didn't just follow maps, they perfected them. Their compasses were not ordinary tools, they were coded instruments. Some chroniclers describe Templar navigators using compasses marked with unfamiliar symbols. Stars aligned not with north, but with sacred geometry. They believed the heavens were not just guides for travel, but messages from God. To follow a constellation was to trace divine design. Each voyage became both a journey and a ritual. To modernize, their charts looked like lines and curves. But to the Templars, they were prayers written in longitude and faith. Certain sea routes were known among them as salted paths. These were courses that only trusted captains could follow, routes salted not just by water, but by oath. They connected safe harbours, secret islands, and monastic stations hidden under false names. Monks, disguised as fishermen, guarded them. Records of these routes rarely survived on paper. They were memorized, passed down like scripture. It was said that a true Templar captain could navigate blindfolded, guided only by the rhythm of the sea and the stars overhead. When the arrests came in 1307, these routes became more than trade lines. They became lifelines. The fleet that vanished from La Rochelle didn't sail into the unknown. It followed paths that had been rehearsed for decades. Some ships may have reached Scotland, others Portugal, and perhaps a few followed older routes westward, chasing the fading light of the sun into waters where the edge of the world was. Still a rumour, no official Templar maps survive today, but fragments appear in strange places. A sea chart found in Venice marked with 8 pointed crosses. A parchment in Portugal showing islands that shouldn't exist until centuries later. Each clue hints at something that shouldn't be possible, that the Templars knew more of the world than history admits, that their maps were more than guides. They were keys, and maybe, just maybe, some of those keys are still waiting to unlock the truth buried beneath the waves. The sea that swallowed the Templar fleet may not have taken them far. Some believe their ships didn't vanish into myth, but found refuge in the cold northern winds of Scotland. In the early 1400s, Scotland was a land cut off from papal authority. Its king, Robert the Bruce, had been excommunicated by the Pope. To the Church, he was an outlaw. To the Templars, that made him an ally. Here, beyond the grasp of Rome and the French crown, a fugitive order could find silence, protection, and perhaps even rebirth. The theory begins with timing. When the Templars were arrested across France in October of 1307, Scotland was already at war with England. Communication between the kingdoms was fractured. Papal decrees carried little weight beyond the Channel. News of the arrests would have taken weeks to reach the Highlands, if it arrived at all. That delay gave the Templars something they no longer had anywhere else: time. Enough to sail, regroup, and disappear into a land already hiding from the Church. Scottish records from that era are fragmented, but they tell small stories that don't quite fit. In the years following the arrests, there are sudden mentions of foreign knights arriving on the western coast. Some chronicles speak of armed strangers who fought alongside Bruce at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, their armour bearing unfamiliar crosses. Local legends claim that it was these mysterious warriors who turned the tide of the battle, appearing at dawn from the mist like ghosts. The Church dismissed it as folklore. Yet the timing is hauntingly close to the years when the Templar fleet would have needed a home. If they did land in Scotland, the Orkney Islands would have been their gateway. Rugged, remote, and dotted with safe inlets, the Orkneys were controlled by Norse-Scottish lords with little loyalty to Rome. The Templars could have found shelter among them easily. From there, the trail leads south toward the lands of the Sinclairs, a family known for its power, wealth, and fascination with the sacred. The Sinclair estates stretched across the region, culminating at Rosslyn, a site already whispered to hold hidden chapels and underground vaults. It is said that beneath the rolling hills near Rosslyn, there are caverns carved long before the famous chapel was built. Some say these tunnels were used to store relics brought from France. Others believe they were built later to guard what the Templars left behind. Either way, something sacred lingers in the air there. The geometry of the land, the symbols on ancient stones, and the names of the surrounding villages all hum with quiet connection to the old order. Whether the Templars sought refuge or resurrection in Scotland, they found a land shaped by secrecy. Its kings defied Rome. Its people guarded what others feared, and its silence was absolute. In those mists, under the northern stars, the knights who once ruled from Jerusalem may have lived out their days unseen, not vanished, but transformed. The Order's fire may have died in France, but in Scotland the embers still glowed. Long before Rosslyn Chapel stood as a stone hymn to mystery, the land beneath it already carried whispers. The Sinclairs, who built it in the 15th century, did not choose the site at random. They were building on something older, something already considered sacred. Beneath the green hills and winding streams of Rosslyn lie caverns, tunnels, and chambers carved into the rock long before the first mason's hammer ever struck stone. Local legends say these caverns once held relics brought from the south, relics that could change everything we think we know about the Knights Templar and the fleet that vanished. When the ships left La Rochelle in 1307, no one knew what they carried. gold and silver were the least of it. The Templars had been guardians of relics since the Crusades. They held treasures said to come from the Temple of Solomon, fragments of the true cross, sacred manuscripts, and artifacts that the church itself would rather see forgotten. If their ships were loaded in secret, it was not just with men, but with meaning. What if those relics made their way to Scotland, hidden far from papal reach, buried where no army could find them? The legends of Rosslyn speak of a vault beneath the chapel, sealed by stone and oath. Some say it holds the Holy Grail itself. Others claim it contains the Ark of the Covenant, or scrolls from the Library of Solomon that escaped the flames of Jerusalem. But another theory runs deeper, that what lies hidden beneath Rosslyn is not an object at all, but blood, the sangreal, the royal blood, a living lineage that the church could not erase. To those who believe it, Rosslyn was built not just as a place of worship, but as a marker, a monument above a secret too great to speak aloud. Archaeologists who have studied the site find strange things, carvings in the chapel that resemble plants from the New World carved decades before Columbus sailed, columns that follow perfect geometric ratios found in ancient Jerusalem, and deep underground, scans reveal hollow spaces, symmetrical, sealed, untouched. The church refuses to allow excavation. The Sinclairs remain silent. Whatever is below has been waiting for centuries. The Templars valued symbols over speeches. They encoded their truths in architecture and art. If they had chosen a place to hide their final secret, they would have chosen a place like Rosslyn, remote, defensible, sacred. The very name carries weight. Rosslyn, from the old words for red waterfall or rose line, both of which echo through Templar and Grail symbolism. The rose for secrecy, the line for lineage. Together they form a signature that feels deliberate, not accidental. So perhaps the fleet did not vanish into myth. Perhaps it fulfilled its mission. Men can die, orders can burn. But an idea can be hidden, buried deep, and reborn as stone. Rosslyn was not the beginning of that idea, nor its end. It was its sanctuary, a silent promise carved into rock that one day the truth would rise again into the light. The Sinclair family were no ordinary nobles. In the centuries after the fall of the Templars, their name became surrounded by an aura of secrecy, wealth, and quiet genius. They were builders, navigators, patrons of strange art, and keepers of symbols that felt older than the stones they carved them into. If any family in Scotland could have sheltered the Templar survivors, it was the Sinclairs. They had the ships, the land, and the motive. And somewhere between their loyalty to Scotland and their fascination with sacred geometry, a pact may have been made that changed the course of hidden history. When the Templars fled France in 1307, their ships needed safe harbours beyond papal reach. The western coast of Scotland offered that safety, and the Sinclairs controlled much of it. Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, was a sailor and explorer himself. His family's ties to Norse seafarers meant he understood the value of maps and maritime secrecy. Some legends claim that his ancestors offered asylum to Templar captains who reached northern waters. Others go further, suggesting that the Sinclairs inherited something far greater than treasure, knowledge. By the time William Sinclair built Rosslyn Chapel in the 15th century, the architectural language of the Templars had already taken root. The chapel is a masterpiece of coded design. Every arch, every column, every carving seems to speak in riddles. The layout mirrors the Temple of Solomon. The ceiling patterns resemble the constellations used in Templar navigation, and scattered throughout the stonework are symbols later adopted by Freemasonry: the compass, the square, the twin pillars. Historians say Freemasonry arose centuries later, but the chapel suggests the blueprint existed long before. Perhaps Rosslyn was the bridge between two worlds, the dying flame of the Templars and the new order that would carry their light into the modern age. The Sinclairs were among the first recorded patrons of Freemasonry. They held the hereditary title of Grand Master in Scotland, a position that carried influence across Europe. Within those lodges, ideas that had once been heresy under the Church found shelter. The worship of wisdom, the pursuit of hidden truth, the reverence for geometry as divine order, all mirrored Templar beliefs. It is as if the knights, who once prayed with swords, had traded them for chisels and compasses. Their faith had not died, it had evolved. There are whispers that the Sinclairs possessed a seal once belonging to the Templars, a signet bearing the image of two riders on one horse. The symbol spoke of unity, of shared purpose, of poverty in service to God. To have carried that seal was to hold the legacy of the order itself. Whether the story is true or not, the Sinclairs acted like guardians of something sacred. They built monuments to silence, hid meaning in art, and kept secrets without ever claiming them aloud. In their halls, stone and secrecy became one, and through them the Templar spirit may have survived, not as soldiers of the sword, but as masons of the hidden word. The Sinclairs and the Templars shared one belief above all others. Some truths are too powerful to destroy. They can only be disguised. While France burned its Templars, Portugal quietly rewrote history. In the early 1400s, when the rest of Europe was still hunting down what remained of the order, King Dinis of Portugal made a remarkable move. He did not destroy the Templars, he simply renamed them. With papal approval, the Knights of the Temple were transformed into the Order of Christ, a new brotherhood with new insignia and a new name. But beneath the surface, almost everything stayed the same. The same knights, the same castles, the same vows, even the same chain of command. It was not destruction, it was disguise. Portugal had always been different. The Templars had played a crucial role in the country's birth. They had fought the Moors, built fortresses, and financed early Portuguese kings. When the papal order arrived to dissolve them, King Dinis hesitated. He owed too much to these warrior monks. Rather than surrender their lands to the Church, he proposed a compromise. The Templars would cease to exist by name, but their assets would pass to a new order formed under royal authority. Pope John XXII agreed, likely seeing it as a formality. But what the Church failed to see was that Portugal had just preserved the Templars intact under another flag. The transformation was seamless. The Templar fortress of Tomar became the new headquarters of the Order of Christ. Its round church, modelled after the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, remained untouched. The same rituals continued within its walls, though the banners had changed. To outsiders, it looked like obedience to the Pope. To insiders, it was survival. The red cross of the Templars was adjusted slightly, reshaped into the cross of the Order of Christ, but the meaning remained. The knights had simply taken off one cloak and put on another. Under this new identity, the order flourished. The knights continued their work not as soldiers of war, but as architects of discovery. By the 15th century, Portugal was leading the world into the age of exploration, and at the heart of it all stood the Order of Christ. Prince Henry the Navigator, the man who launched voyages along Africa and toward the unknown West, was its Grand Master. The Red Cross of the Order flew proudly on the sails of ships that would reshape the world. Some historians call it coincidence, others see continuity. The same secretive discipline, the same fascination with maps and the stars, the same quest for divine knowledge through exploration. The Templars had once guarded the road to Jerusalem. Now, under the Order of Christ, they guarded the routes to the edges of the earth. The sea became their new temple, and discovery their new crusade. The Church may have thought it buried the Templars in 1307, But in Portugal, they were reborn. Not as heretics, not as ghosts, but as explorers of heaven's reflection on the ocean's surface. In a single act of royal cunning, their fire had been hidden, not extinguished, and from that fire the modern world would eventually be lit. The White Cross never truly disappeared, it only changed its colour. When the Templar fleet vanished in 1307, many believed their sails were lost forever, their banners swallowed by sea and silence. But in Portugal, nearly a century later, the cross returned. It was no longer white on red, it was red on white, stitched onto the sails of the Order of Christ. To the world, it was a new emblem for a new age of exploration. But to those who knew the truth, it was the same symbol reborn, the same vow renewed, the same mission continuing across the waves. From the fortress of Tomar, the Order of Christ grew into the beating heart of Portugal's naval power. The old Templar ports were reopened, the shipyards came alive again, and soon the docks were filled with vessels unlike any seen before, sleek, fast, built for endurance and distance. These were not ships for local trade, they were instruments of discovery, and every plank of wood carried echoes of the Templar fleet that had escaped La Rochelle so long ago. The men who commanded them were called explorers, but in truth they were heirs of the same brotherhood that once guarded secrets of the Holy Land. Under their Red Cross sails, the Portuguese began to chart the unknown, the coast of Africa, the Atlantic islands, the hidden routes to India. Everywhere the Order's ships went, the mark of the cross followed, bold and unmistakable. It became the symbol of a nation, but also the mask of a mystery. The Church saw in it God's blessing on Christian expansion, but some whisper that the Order of Christ had another agenda, one carried quietly beneath the noise of conquest. The Templars had always sought knowledge, not empire. Their voyages had less to do with wealth and more to do with wisdom. Perhaps these ships were continuing that search, not for gold or land, but for the sacred truths the old world had tried to destroy. Prince Henry the Navigator, the Grand Master of the Order, oversaw these missions with almost religious devotion. He gathered mathematicians, mapmakers, and mystics from across Europe. He built observatories where the stars were studied like Holy Scripture. The Red Cross on the sails was more than decoration. It was a compass of faith. Every journey began with a prayer not for conquest, but for revelation. Some even said the explorers were following charts copied from ancient Templar archives, maps that reached beyond the known edge of the world. To this day, historians argue over how much of the Templar spirit survived within the Order of Christ, but the evidence lingers everywhere: the symbols, the architecture, the rituals of secrecy, the same oath to serve a higher truth beyond crown or pope, the same silent code that the sea would guard their mission. The Templars had been declared dead by kings and condemned by priests. Yet here, under a different flag, they were alive again. Their ships crossed the same waters they once fled upon, their cross, catching the wind like a whisper from the past. The fleet that vanished had returned. It just learned to sail under another name. The story of the Western Ocean does not begin with Columbus. Long before 1492, sailors whispered about strange visitors who had already crossed it. In the ports of Galicia and the islands of the Azores, there were stories of ships with white sails and crimson crosses that appeared from nowhere, anchored briefly, and then vanished again into the mist. The men aboard spoke little, but their cloaks were white, their emblems familiar, and their manners unlike any other. Some said they were monks, others swore they were ghosts. But to those who listened carefully, the descriptions matched the long-lost Templars. By the 14th century, the Order of Christ in Portugal had inherited the fleet, the maps, and perhaps even the mission of the old Templars. They had ships capable of crossing vast waters, and knowledge drawn from charts older than Europe itself. The ocean to the west was not a mystery to them, it was a horizon waiting. Officially, these voyages did not exist. No records, no royal decrees. But legends remained, carried by fishermen and priests who saw the impossible. In one story from the Galician coast, a storm brought a massive ship to shore, its hull marked with a faded red cross. The crew refused help, repaired their vessel in silence, and left by dawn. The villagers found coins of silver stamped with symbols no one could read. The Azores tell their own tale. When Portuguese explorers reached the islands in the early 1500s, they found old stone crosses standing on cliffs. Some of these crosses were worn smooth by centuries of wind, suggesting they had been there long before any known settlers. Local legends claimed that strangers had once landed there, dressed in white, building small shrines before disappearing toward the sunset. Even the earliest maps of the Atlantic hint at something strange. Islands appear where no one had yet sailed. Names written in Latin and Old French drift on the parchment like fragments of a forgotten journey. Further across the ocean, among the rugged shores of Nova Scotia, indigenous legends speak of pale visitors who came from the sea generations before European colonists. These visitors brought gifts, not weapons. They built stone cairns and spoke of a god of light. Some researchers believe these stories describe the Norse. Others see something different. The mention of red-marked sails, of rituals by fire, and of sacred vessels buried near the shore suggests a brotherhood with a different purpose. If the Templars, or their successors, reached the Western world, it would not have been for conquest. They were not seeking gold or land. They were seeking safety, perhaps a sanctuary beyond the reach of kings and popes, a new Jerusalem not of the east, but of the far west. The ocean was vast enough to hide them, and the stars that guided their ships were the same stars they once followed from the deserts of Palestine. Whether the legends are memory or myth, one truth endures. Someone was sailing west long before history admits, and when those red crosses vanished into the horizon, they were not lost. They were simply the first to find what others would one day claim to discover. Oak Island is small, barely a patch of land off the coast of Nova Scotia, yet it has swallowed more treasure hunters than any pirate legend ever told. For more than 2 centuries, people have dug into its muddy soil, following the promise of hidden vaults, booby-trapped tunnels, and chests of unimaginable wealth. But what if the mystery was never about gold at all? What if Oak Island's secret goes back not to pirates, but to the knights who vanished from Europe in 1307? The story began in the late 1700s, when a young man exploring the island found a strange depression in the ground. Curious, he and his friends started digging. Just a few feet down, they found a layer of oak logs, then another, and another, spaced perfectly apart like the floors of a man-made shaft. The deeper they dug, the stranger it became. More wood, layers of charcoal, coconut fibre, and clay, materials that had no reason to be there. At 90 feet, they found a stone carved with symbols that no one could read. The next day, the pit flooded. It has never been dry since. Every attempt to excavate it ended the same way. Flood tunnels from the sea filled it faster than pumps could empty it. Some thought the flooding was a natural accident, but others saw design. The pit was a trap engineered by minds that understood pressure, water, and secrecy. The kind of minds that once built fortresses and hid relics beneath cathedrals. The kind of minds that wore white mantles marked with crimson crosses. Theories connecting the Templars to Oak Island began with the island's strange geometry. Some maps of the area show landmarks arranged in perfect triangular and circular formations, matching patterns used in Templar architecture. Even the distances between the island's key points mirror measurements found in ancient Templar chapels. Coincidences, perhaps, but too precise to ignore. Then there are the old stones scattered along the Nova Scotia coast, marked with crosses identical to those of the Order of Christ in Portugal. These symbols suggest that, long before Columbus, someone with Templar knowledge was here, mapping, building, and hiding. If the Templars did bury something on Oak Island, what was it? Treasure seems too simple. They were rich beyond measure, but their real wealth wasn't in gold. It was in knowledge, documents, relics, records of a bloodline or a gospel too dangerous for the church to allow. Perhaps Oak Island was chosen not for isolation, but for protection. The booby-trapped tunnels weren't meant to keep thieves out. They were meant to keep truth sealed in. No one has ever reached the bottom. Machines have broken, shafts have collapsed, and still the pit refuses to surrender its secret. Maybe it was never meant to. The Templars were experts in using legend as camouflage. The promise of gold keeps the curious digging, century after century, while the real treasure, whatever it was, remains untouched beneath the earth. Oak Island may not hold coins or crowns, but it holds a story, and perhaps that story was the one the Templars wanted hidden most of all. No one knows what the Templar fleet carried when it slipped away from La Rochelle in the dark of October 1307, but whatever it was, it mattered enough to risk everything. The ships were loaded in silence, guarded by men who already knew they would never return. Witnesses saw chests sealed with wax, crates carried as if they held something sacred, and scrolls passed hand to hand beneath torchlight. Gold, perhaps? Relics? Maybe? But whispers say it was something far more dangerous than either. It was truth. 4 centuries, the Templars had gathered treasures beyond price from the Holy Land. They had walked the ruins of Solomon's Temple, explored tunnels beneath Jerusalem, and uncovered relics that kings and popes would have killed to possess. Some said they found the Ark of the Covenant. Others believed they discovered the Holy Grail. But the Grail was never just a cup. In the old legends, it was described as a vessel of divine power, a container of something sacred. To the Templars, that container may not have been made of gold. It may have been flesh and blood. The idea of a holy bloodline, a lineage stretching from Christ himself, was whispered among mystics even in their time. The Church called it blasphemy. The Templars called it revelation. If they possessed documents proving such a thing, then no wonder kings and popes feared them. They would have held evidence that divine authority was not a crown or a throne, but a family line. To destroy that truth, their enemies would burn 100 libraries. To protect it, the Templars would cross oceans. But not everyone agrees the fleet carried blood or relics. Some believe it carried knowledge, something abstract yet just as powerful. The Templars had studied ancient sciences lost since the fall of Alexandria. They learned geometry from the Greeks, alchemy from the Arabs, and sacred mathematics from Jewish mystics. They saw no difference between faith and reason. To them, numbers were prayers and architecture was revelation in stone. If their ships carried maps, codes, or teachings that unified those worlds, the Church would have seen it as heresy. And yet, it might have been humanity's first step toward understanding the universe as divine order. There are records of strange artifacts surfacing centuries later, parchments written in languages no scholar could trace, symbols identical to those carved into Templar chapels. Some were found in Scotland, others in Portugal, and one legend claims a chest washed ashore near the Azores in the 15th century, sealed with beeswax and marked with a single 8-pointed cross. Inside, only scrolls wrapped in crimson cloth. The men who found them brought the chest to a monastery. By morning, the chest and the monks were gone. Whatever the fleet carried, it was more than treasure. Gold could not survive fire and crown, but ideas could. The Templars understood that. Their final cargo was likely not meant to enrich the world, but to awaken it. And maybe, somewhere, that knowledge still waits, hidden in vaults or blood or the silence between myths, because some truths are too sacred to be destroyed. They can only be disguised. When the Templar fleet disappeared, it didn't just vanish into the sea, it sank into language. The Templars were masters of secrecy, not only through silence but through symbols. Their greatest weapon was not the sword but the cipher. Every ship that sailed from La Rochelle carried not only men and treasure, but messages, plans, written in codes that no fire could destroy and no inquisitor could read. They understood that true preservation meant transformation. If the body of their order could be broken, the mind could be hidden in words that outlived them. Their codes appeared everywhere, often disguised as prayer. In church ledgers, odd phrases appeared in the margins. In illuminated manuscripts, the placement of colours followed mathematical patterns. Even in liturgical music, the rise and fall of notes sometimes corresponded to geometric sequences. To the faithful, they were hymns. To the initiated, they were coordinates, instructions, or warnings. Each monastery and port, linked by these ciphers, formed part of a larger map, invisible to anyone who did not already know the key. Templar encryption borrowed from every culture they encountered. From Arabic scholars, they learned number substitution. From Jewish mystics, they adopted gematria, a method that gave every letter a numerical value. From ancient Greek texts, they took the idea that knowledge could be hidden within harmony. By layering all three systems, they created messages that could only be read when all faiths were understood together. It was a code of unity disguised as division. Perhaps that was their greatest secret of all. Some of these ciphers survived long after the order fell. In Portugal, carvings on old monasteries display sequences of circles and crosses arranged in groups of 7 and 12. Historians call them decoration, but when measured, they align perfectly with Templar ratios used in fortress design. In Scotland, gravestones bear strange markings, spirals, twin suns, and bees carved beside Latin words that make no sense. They could be symbols of rebirth, or they could be coordinates, pointing to hidden archives buried beneath sacred ground. There are even tales of coded messages at sea. Sailors spoke of logs kept in cipher, describing voyages that never appeared in royal records. Some letters recovered from shipwrecks show repeated patterns of letters, written in ways that suggest encryption. One fragment, preserved in a Lisbon archive, mentions a phrase translated as, "The light sleeps beneath the salt." No one knows what it means. Some think it refers to treasure. Others think it means truth buried beneath the ocean, waiting to rise again. The Templars believed that words could carry souls. To them, a code was more than secrecy. It was resurrection. If their enemies destroyed their temples, their knowledge would still live, hidden inside stone, scripture, and song. When their fleet vanished, their message didn't. It scattered, encoded in architecture, in art, in the rhythm of history itself. You can still see it if you look closely enough. The same numbers, the same stars, the same cross repeated in shadow. The Templars may have vanished, but their language still speaks, quietly, through everything they left behind. Long before European flags were planted in the soil of the New World, stories were already being told of strangers who came from across the sea. They did not arrive with armies or banners of conquest. They came in silence. their ships moving like ghosts through the fog, their sails marked with crimson crosses that glowed under the setting sun. Among the indigenous peoples of North America, there are old tales of pale bearded visitors who built stone cairns, prayed to the sky, and spoke of a god of light. They brought gifts, not weapons. They offered peace, not war. And then, as quietly as they came, they vanished. Could these have been the last Templars? If the Templar fleet did reach the Western Ocean, it would have found a land untouched by the crowns of Europe, a place where the old order could be reborn, free from the control of kings and popes. Some researchers believe they may have landed along the eastern coast of Canada, where ancient stone structures stand that do not match native or colonial design. In Nova Scotia, near the same, waters that later hid the mystery of Oak Island, there are remnants of stone foundations and carvings of crosses that predate recorded settlement. The soil there holds secrets that no one can explain. Among the Mi'kmaq people, there are legends of visitors who came in great wooden canoes with white wings. These visitors shared stories of a god who valued truth above power and built cairns aligned with the stars. They taught the Mi'kmaq to use certain symbols to mark sacred ground, symbols that match those found in Templar sites in Europe. The Mi'kmaq called them men of light. Later, when Europeans finally arrived with swords and greed, the tribes remembered the earlier strangers who had come not to take, but to teach. Farther south, in the Yucatan and along the Gulf Coast, there are carvings that seem out of place. Figures wearing crosses on their chests, ships painted with patterns that match the sails of the Order of Christ in Portugal, and even depictions of stars arranged in the same formations used in Templar navigation. Some archaeologists dismiss these as coincidence, but the patterns keep repeating. Across thousands of miles, the same symbols appear, always tied to the sea, always tied to the cross. If the Templars did reach the Americas, they may have found what they had been searching for all along, a new Jerusalem, not of gold or marble, but of freedom, a sanctuary where faith could exist without fear. They would not have built cities or fortresses. They would have built relationships, passing their teachings quietly to the people who welcomed them. When Columbus sailed in 1492, he may not have discovered a new world at all. He may have rediscovered one already touched by a forgotten brotherhood. The Templars vanished from Europe, but perhaps they did not die. Perhaps they crossed the sea and left behind not treasure, but memory. A memory carried in legend, carved in stone, and whispered through the centuries by those who still remember the men who came with light in their eyes and peace in their hands. When the Templars were founded, their mission was simple and sacred. They were guardians of Jerusalem, protectors of pilgrims, and defenders of the faith. But when the holy city fell in the year 1291, their world collapsed. The temple they had sworn to defend was gone. The land that gave them purpose was lost. Yet instead of fading into history, the Templars did something extraordinary. They transformed. If they could no longer guard Jerusalem on land, they would carry it with them upon the sea. Their new temple would not be built from stone and gold, but from wood and sail, a floating Zion that could never be conquered. The Templars had always believed that holiness was not confined to walls. The Temple of Solomon was sacred because of what it represented, not what it contained. It was the meeting place between heaven and earth, a symbol of balance and divine order. When that physical temple was lost, the Templars turned the idea inward. The true temple was within the brotherhood itself, within their unity and devotion. Each ship that left La Rochelle carried not just cargo, but this spiritual transformation. The fleet became a moving sanctuary, a portable holy city that could travel wherever truth was needed. They organized their ships like a monastic community. The decks became cloisters, the cabins served as chapels, Prayers were said at sunrise and sunset. Every journey was a pilgrimage. The knights believed the sea itself was divine, its tides like the heartbeat of creation. When they sailed, they carried relics, scriptures, and sacred geometry in their minds and hearts. The ocean became their cathedral roof, the stars their stained glass. It was faith without walls. Some accounts suggest that even after their fall, the Templars continued to refer to themselves as custodians of the temple, though no one knew what that meant anymore. Perhaps they had rebuilt it in secret. Perhaps they had found ways to preserve its mysteries in symbols and codes. The octagonal towers found in Templar fortresses across Europe may have mirrored the original temple's design. On the sea, their ships carried banners marked with those same 8 points, representing resurrection and eternal order. There is something poetic about the image of a temple adrift on the ocean. It fits the Templar spirit perfectly. They were men of paradox, warriors who prayed, monks who fought, seekers who obeyed no master but God. Their exile did not end their mission, it purified it. No longer bound by kings or land, they became servants of an idea that could not be destroyed, a temple that existed wherever they stood, wherever they sailed, wherever their cross touched the wind. So when the fleet vanished, maybe it was not an escape, maybe it was a pilgrimage, a voyage to carry the sacred flame beyond the reach of corruption, a Jerusalem reborn upon the waves. And even now, when the sea is calm and the horizon glows red at dusk, some say the light that reflects upon the water is not just the setting sun. It is the last gleam of that floating temple, still sailing, still searching for a home. For 7 centuries, the world believed the Knights Templar died in disgrace, condemned as heretics, accused of blasphemy, burned in public squares as enemies of the church they once served. It was one of the darkest betrayals in history. Yet hidden deep within the Vatican archives, sealed and forgotten for hundreds of years, was a truth that rewrote everything. In the year 2001, researchers uncovered a document known as the Chinon parchment. Its faded ink and fragile pages revealed a confession, an investigation, and most shocking of all, an absolution. The Pope had quietly forgiven the Templars. The parchment was written in the year 1314 by papal scribes under the command of Pope Clement V. It recorded secret interviews with the Templar leadership, including their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. Under torture and pressure, the knights admitted to certain strange rituals, but they denied heresy. They confessed to symbolic acts misunderstood by the Church, gestures meant to humble pride, not to mock God. The Pope listened, examined, and finally concluded that the order was not guilty of the crimes for which they were destroyed. He absolved them in the name of Christ. And then, for reasons still debated, he buried the truth. Why would the Vatican hide an absolution that could have saved the order's name? The answer lies in politics. By the time Clement issued his secret forgiveness, King Philip of France had already executed many of the knights and seized their wealth. To reveal the truth would have been to challenge a king, risk a war, and expose the Church's weakness. So the Pope stayed silent. He let the Templars die condemned in public while forgiving them in private. It was mercy without courage, truth without justice. The Chinon parchment remained lost for nearly 700 years, buried among thousands of unmarked scrolls in the Vatican's secret archive. When it was finally rediscovered, it shook historians and believers alike. The Vatican quietly confirmed its authenticity. For the first time, it was clear that the Church had known the Templars were innocent, yet no grand apology followed, no public restoration of their honour. The silence continued, as if the truth was too heavy to lift into daylight. To this day, the Vatican's archives remain vast and mostly unexplored. Only a small fraction has ever been opened to the public. What else lies waiting in those shadowed vaults? Letters, maps, or evidence of what the Templars truly found in the East? The chin on parchment may only be the beginning, a single page torn from a much larger secret. The Church's quiet absolution is a story of irony and sorrow. The men who built Christendom's wealth, who fought for its faith, died condemned by the same power they served. Yet in the end, their souls were cleared in secret, and the Church never told the world. Perhaps silence was its own form of confession. The Vatican knew the truth. But sometimes, truth itself is more dangerous than heresy. After the Templars vanished, something strange began to stir across Europe. New brotherhoods appeared, secret societies with symbols that no one could quite explain. Men who met in candlelit halls, spoke in riddles, and built their rituals around geometry, silence, and loyalty. They called themselves Freemasons. To most, they were simply builders and craftsmen, guardians of architecture and art. But look closer, and their language begins to sound familiar. Their symbols, their handshakes, even their oaths carry the same echoes that once belonged to the Knights Templar. It is as if the order never truly died. It just changed its armour. The Templars had been master builders long before the word mason meant anything more than stoneworker. They designed fortresses that aligned with the stars, cathedrals that turned sunlight into prayer, and vaults that could hold both relics and secrets. When their order fell in 1307, many surviving members scattered into guilds of stonemasons, the only communities that still shared their skills and secrecy. Over time, those guilds transformed from groups of labourers into something more philosophical. They began to speak of light, truth, and divine architecture. Their temples were no longer built of stone but of wisdom. By the 17th century, Freemasonry had spread through Europe, cloaked in mystery. Its rituals spoke of the Temple of Solomon, of builders who sought divine perfection, and of secret knowledge passed down through chosen initiates. The Masonic compass and square replaced the Templar sword and cross, but the message remained the same: discipline, devotion, and a hidden link to something greater than kings or priests. Many of their lodges even used red crosses. In their seals, a quiet nod to an older lineage. Some historians dismiss the connection as coincidence, yet the parallels refuse to fade. The Masons' reverence for Jerusalem, their secret rites of initiation, their belief in moral purity and sacred geometry, all of it mirrors Templar philosophy. Even their highest degrees speak of a lost order of knights who carried wisdom from the Holy Land to the West. The language changes, but the rhythm remains, as if the same melody had been played on new instruments. There are also traces in architecture itself, cathedrals built in the Gothic-style bear carvings of the Templar cross and the Masonic compass side by side. Chapels like Rosslyn in Scotland blend both traditions so perfectly that it is impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. It feels less like imitation and more like continuation. A secret line of inheritance running quietly through the centuries. Perhaps this was the Templars' final victory. They understood that ideas could not be burned at the stake. Faith could survive if hidden in stone, symbols, and story. By merging with the Masons, their order achieved immortality. Their swords became squares, their vows became blueprints, and their battles became allegories of enlightenment. What began as a brotherhood of warriors became a brotherhood of builders. The temple they once defended now exists in the human spirit, a place of truth built one secret at a time. Across the old harbours of Europe, there are statues that seem out of place. Dark-skinned Madonnas, cradling pale-faced children. Their faces are ancient, their eyes deep, and their presence unmistakably powerful. Pilgrims kneel before them, lighting candles, whispering prayers. Yet no one can say where they came from or why they look the way they do. To the Church, they are symbols of faith. To historians, they are mysteries carved in stone. But to those who follow the trail of the vanished Templar fleet, the Black Madonna is more than devotion. She is a code. A silent flag raised in hidden harbours, marking the path of the ships that fled in the year 1307. The first Black Madonnas appeared near ports tied to the Templars: La Rochelle, Marseille, Barcelona, Lisbon, always near the sea, always near places where whispers of escape lingered. Her image carries layers of meaning. The dark hue is not simply colour. It represents mystery, transformation, the hidden womb of creation. To the Templars, who revered both Mary the Virgin and Mary Magdalene, she was the union of the sacred feminine and divine wisdom, a secret theology in plain sight. Some even say the Black Madonna was the emblem painted on the sails of the ships that vanished, a symbol of refuge and rebirth beneath the stars. Look closely at the shrines, and you begin to notice patterns. Bees carved into altars, stars arranged in hexagons, small boats etched beside halos. The same imagery appears in Templar seals and manuscripts. The bee for immortality, the star for divine order, the ship for the journey of the soul. Together they form a language, one that speaks of protection, exile, and return. The cults that grew around these Madonnas often held secret rituals at night, where women led prayers and sailors offered gifts of honey and salt. It was as if the faith the Templars once guarded had gone underground, reborn as symbol and story. In the south of France, in a small town called Saintes-Maries-de-la-Mer, the Black Madonna is still carried to the sea each year in a grand procession. Locals say she arrived by boat with Mary Magdalene herself, fleeing persecution. The tradition predates any official church record, passed down through fishermen and gypsies. The Templars once owned land nearby. Some historians believe this was one of their hidden ports, where relics and documents were smuggled from the east. The festival may be the last living echo of that escape, a reenactment of survival disguised as devotion. The Black Madonna embodies the same duality the Templars carried within them. She is both mother and mystery, light and darkness, earth and divinity. Her skin, black as night, mirrors the ocean depths where the fleet disappeared. Her child, radiant, reflects the hope that something sacred endured. When the Templars vanished, they left no flags, no ships, no names. But they may have left her, a symbol that could not be burned or banned. A quiet sentinel watching over the coasts where their ships once sailed. The Black Madonna remains, not as a relic of loss, but as the eternal mother of exile, the last guardian of the forgotten fleet. When the Templars burned, the world thought their story was over. Their name was cursed, their castles emptied, their banners erased from sight. But names are fragile things, ideas are not. The order that vanished in fire may have survived in silence, shedding its title like a snake shedding its skin. What remained was not an army or an institution, but a current of thought that slipped through the cracks of history. Sovereignty, knowledge, brotherhood. These were the real treasures of the Templars, and they did not die. They hid. Imagine what it meant to survive, when survival itself was treason. To speak the name of your order could mean death. To display your cross could invite the gallows. And so the Templars did what the wise always do. They adapted. They disguised their truth in symbols, in architecture, in coded prayers. The sword became a compass. The temple became a circle. The rituals continued behind locked doors and whispered oaths. In this way, the order was reborn without ever being seen. Their beliefs had always been deeper than the Church admitted. They studied sacred geometry, ancient texts, and the wisdom of the East. Some called it heresy, others called it gnosis, the knowledge of the divine through direct experience. To the Templars, truth was not given by priests or kings. It was discovered through understanding. That belief, dangerous in its time, survived their destruction. Centuries later, it resurfaced in the philosophies of secret societies, alchemists, and mystics who spoke of light hidden in darkness. The Templar spirit had not been extinguished. It had gone underground. In their silence grew a new kind of freedom. The Templars no longer served the Pope or the crown. They served only the idea that divinity lives within man, that power can be reclaimed through knowledge. That seed, planted in the ashes of their persecution, took root in unexpected places. In the manuscripts of the Rosicrucians, in the lodges of Freemasons, in the scientific curiosity of the Renaissance. Everywhere you find the spark of hidden knowledge and sacred symmetry, you find the echo of their creed. To vanish completely would have been to lose everything, but to vanish strategically was brilliance. By letting the name die, the Templars freed themselves from history's reach. The Church could condemn a man, but not an idea. Kings could burn bodies, but not blueprints of thought. Their order became immortal not through memory, but through mutation. It became a philosophy disguised as myth, a truth hidden in allegory. And so when you look at the world today, at the cathedrals that defy time, at the secret symbols carved into marble, at the brotherhoods that still whisper oaths of light and loyalty, you are seeing them, not as knights in armour, but as keepers of a flame that refused to die. The Templars may have surrendered their name, but not their purpose. Their rebirth was not marked by trumpets or triumph. It came in silence, in shadow, and in wisdom too dangerous to speak aloud. Centuries after the flames of 1307 died, the Templars were supposed to be gone forever. Yet their name keeps resurfacing, reborn in fragments across the world. Some call themselves the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Others trace their lines through Masonic lodges and royal archives. All claim the same inheritance, a link to the brotherhood that refused to vanish. Some hunt for buried treasure, gold and relics they believe still lie beneath European soil. Others pursue something far less tangible, a truth too old and too fragile for public light. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta, or SMOM, is one of the most recognized heirs to the Templar legacy. It emerged not long after the original order fell, reorganized under papal blessing but echoing the same vows of poverty, chastity, and service. Today it operates as both a religious order and a diplomatic power, with its own passports, embassies, and even a seat at the United Nations. On the surface it is devoted to charity and medicine, but some whisper that its archives still hold maps, seals, and documents linking back to the vanished fleet. Its knights wear the same white cross on red that once marked the sails of La Rochelle. The design never changed, only the mission's disguise. Beyond the Church's reach, another lineage emerged, the Freemasons. Unlike the Maltese Knights, they made no claim of papal approval. Their temples are lit by philosophy, not faith. Their rituals honour reason, geometry, and enlightenment. But beneath that language, traces of older vows remain: initiation by ordeal, brotherhood above rank, the belief that truth must be protected, not preached. Some of their degrees even bear names like Knight of the Temple or Guardian of the East. Whether those are symbolic or literal, no one can say for sure. In the 19th and 20th centuries, countless revivalist groups appeared, claiming to restore the original Templar order. Some met in secret chambers and swore ancient oaths. Others became charitable societies, with titles more ceremonial than sacred. But scattered among them were whispers of something more authentic. A quiet network of families, archivists, and historians who believe they carry the last thread of an unbroken line. Their work is not about wealth, but preservation. To keep the truth alive, they guard documents, relics, and sometimes bloodlines that connect back to the days when the temple still stood in Jerusalem. Modern knights no longer wield swords, but their wars continue. They battle forgetfulness, corruption, and distortion. They seek to preserve what the world has tried to rewrite, whether through libraries, charities, or quiet alliances. They fight for the same purpose the Templars once served, to protect something sacred from being erased. And though many orders have become hollow reflections of the original, the idea they represent still burns beneath the surface. So perhaps the Templars never truly disappeared. They evolved. Their armor became suits. Their fortresses became foundations. Their treasure became truth. Somewhere in archives, in lodges, or in the quiet hearts of those who still believe, the modern knights keep watch. Not for glory, not for gold, but for the secret their ancestors once died to protect. What if the fleet that vanished from La Rochelle was never running from anything? What if it was running towards something? Historians often imagine the Templars fleeing with gold and relics, desperate to save their fortune from the crown. But what if gold was never the point? The Templars had always been richer in knowledge than in treasure. They built cathedrals using geometry older than Rome. They studied the stars with the precision of astronomers centuries ahead of their time. Perhaps the ships that slipped into the Atlantic that night were not carrying wealth but wisdom, a plan scattered like seeds across the world. The Templars were not just warriors. They were thinkers, engineers, philosophers. They believed in divine architecture, in the idea that creation itself followed sacred patterns. To them, the world was a temple built by God, and man's purpose was to understand it. Their travels to the Holy Land exposed them to ancient secrets from Egypt, Babylon, and Persia. They learned about cycles of time, sacred numbers, and the balance between spirit and matter. These weren't just curiosities. They were blueprints for civilization. And when the church turned against them, those blueprints had to be protected at any cost. Imagine the fleet as a moving library, each ship carrying a fragment of a larger truth, maps, scrolls, artifacts, and ideas. Scattered to different corners of the world, each piece safe on its own, but incomplete without the others. Some went north to Scotland, others south to Portugal. Some perhaps crossed the ocean itself. Their disappearance wasn't chaos. It was design, a dispersal, not a defeat. They were preserving something that had to outlast kings and popes. Something meant to awaken only when the world was ready to understand it. There are clues that this was never about treasure. The Templars never tried to reclaim their wealth, even when opportunities arose decades later. Surviving members joined new orders quietly, avoiding tension. The knowledge they guarded began to resurface centuries later during the Renaissance, when Europe suddenly rediscovered geometry, astronomy, and humanism. Ideas that mirrored Templar philosophy. It is as if the seeds they planted had finally begun to bloom. Some believe this was the grand plan, to hide divine knowledge within human progress, to let it rise slowly, invisibly, through art, science, and architecture. A revelation disguised as evolution. Perhaps the Templars knew that truth could not be forced upon the world. It had to awaken gently, in minds ready to see. If this was their plan, then the fleet that vanished was not lost at sea. It became the tide itself, shaping history in silence. The Templars may have known they would be erased, but their ideas would not. and so they sailed into the night, not as fugitives, but as messengers. Their mission no longer to guard Jerusalem, but to rebuild it within the human soul, a temple not of stone, but of understanding, and maybe that is the real treasure that still moves unseen beneath the waves. Fog rolled over the cliffs like a soft grey curtain, swallowing the horizon and leaving only the sound of waves against stone. Fishermen of the 17th century swore they saw ships drifting where no harbour existed. Tall masts rose from the mist, sails full but silent, crews moving without sound. Some claimed to glimpse the white crosses of the Templars, bright against the grey, vanishing before a single rowboat could reach them. These were not ordinary ships. They appeared off coasts where no charts led, along lonely stretches of Ireland, the Scottish Hebrides, and even the shores of New England centuries later. In 1823, a lighthouse keeper in Nova Scotia recorded in his journal the sudden emergence of a fleet. He noted the air grew heavy, cold, and still. Through the fog, shadows of long dead ships seemed alive. The keeper described sailors with long cloaks and silver belts moving, as if time itself had stopped around them. Then, as mysteriously as they arrived, the fleet dissolved into mist. No trace remained, except the eerie feeling of having witnessed something impossible. Historians have long debated these accounts. Some dismiss them as folklore, ghost stories passed down by lonely men at sea. Yet the consistency of reports across centuries is striking. The descriptions match not only the Templars' known vessels from the early 14th century, but also the coded symbols tied to their order. Witnesses mentioned carvings on bows resembling bees, crosses, and arcane patterns later found in European churches. These were not random decorations. They were markers of identity, symbols meant to be seen by those who knew their meaning. In 1912, a sailor off the coast of Brittany wrote letters describing the sudden appearance of a fleet during a thick fog. He claimed to see light reflecting off polished armour, the shimmer of banners still marked with the white cross, though faded by time. He swore the ships moved as if guided by invisible hands, avoiding rocks and currents with perfect precision. When the fog lifted, nothing remained. Maps of the area showed no navigable channels where the ships had been seen. Some theorists suggest these sightings were echoes, remnants of the Templars' original fleet preserved in the memory of the sea. Others argue the fleet had survived, hidden in remote harbours and reappearing only to those with eyes trained to see. Perhaps the Templars' mission had shifted from physical movement to symbolic presence. Their vessels became legends, a ghostly projection of the order itself, guarding knowledge and lineage across time and space. Whatever the truth, the fog and the sea became partners in secrecy. The ships that appeared and vanished were more than sightings. They were reminders that the Templars' story did not end in 1307. It sailed on in the periphery of vision, in whispers of waves, in the sudden chill of mist, carrying with it the memory of a fleet that vanished but was never truly lost. The streets of medieval France fell silent after October 13th, 1307. The cries of knights dragged from their beds, the clatter of hooves, and the shouts of arrest faded into memory. The world believed the Templars were gone, erased by crown and cross. Yet whispers lingered, carried on winds through port towns, over mountains, and along rivers. Stories of men in white cloaks, of ships appearing in mist, of treasures and secrets hidden beneath stone, refused to vanish entirely. Perhaps disappearance was an illusion, a veil drawn over eyes unready to see. For centuries, historians and chroniclers documented the fall, writing narratives that emphasized failure, betrayal, and the supposed end of the order. Yet behind the official records, inconsistencies persisted. Accounts of survivors travelling north to Scotland, to Rosslyn, to secret. Harbours in Portugal hinted at a continuity unacknowledged. Legends spoke of silent fleets, of monasteries that never fell, of coded manuscripts hidden in plain sight, preserved by those who understood the value of discretion. It was a different kind of victory, one invisible to kings and popes. By the 18th century, the symbols of the Templars had begun to surface in new forms. Freemasonry, the Knights of Malta, even obscure noble families carried traces of the order's rituals, emblems, and teachings. The White Cross had been transformed into badges, architecture, and secret handshakes. The knowledge once encoded in scrolls and banners was now whispered in lodges and halls, surviving through adaptation, not confrontation. The Church could suppress documents, burn libraries, and scatter men across Europe, but it could not erase ideas that lived in practice, in repetition, in coded behaviours passed quietly from mentor to pupil. Perhaps that was the true genius of the Templars. They understood the power of invisibility, of persistence beneath notice. They had learned to carry their mission not in public glory, but in careful, almost invisible continuity. Knowledge, bloodlines, sacred objects, and cryptic teachings could be preserved in ways that even the most powerful institutions could not disrupt. They became ghosts walking among the living, not haunting for revenge, but safeguarding a purpose. Across oceans and centuries, the echoes continued. The white cloaks reappeared in Nova Scotia, in hidden monasteries, in symbols etched into Masonic halls, in designs that seemed coincidental but were anything but. The Templars' essence was no longer tethered to castles, fortresses, or fleets. It was encoded in culture, in lineage, and in the rhythms of secrecy itself. Their lesson was clear. Survival did not always require confrontation. Sometimes survival required patience, invisibility, and the quiet endurance of legacy. And so, the story circles back. The Templars may not have vanished at all. They may have simply walked out of history's glare, learning how to hide in plain sight, waiting, watching, carrying forward their knowledge and purpose. Perhaps when we look closely at symbols on buildings, at crests in old libraries, at cryptic notes passed in silence, we are seeing not ghosts, but a living continuity. The fleet that vanished, was never lost. It simply became something else, something patient, something enduring, and maybe, just maybe, it is still waiting.